Hello and welcome to another video. Today we're diving the Heroine off the coast of Block Island and Point Judith in Rhode Island. We headed out today bright and early on the Priority 2 with Captain Rick. Red from Giant Stride was our fearless leader. I was joined by Molly, George, Kevin, Ross, and Matt. And we came out today for a double dip on the Heroine. As you can see, we just tied in. We used a Carolina rig today with a breakaway line in the anchor, and so we're going to run a reel from that. This is the first time I've been on this shipwreck, and Molly is with me, so we will be laying a line, not so much for exploration purposes, but just so we can keep track of ourselves. It was a bit of a current today, so having that as a backup method of navigation and to keep us attached to the shipwreck was pretty handy. We were the last to roll in, and we did have a couple of neighbors around us in the bay, a couple of trawlers nearby, so the visibility this morning was really not great, but you know, we were underwater, we did the best we could, and any dive is a good dive that ends well. As you can see, we're starting to get ourselves oriented. Like I said, neither Molly or myself has done this wreck before, so we are starting to lay some line and get away from the anchor line and get a sense of where we're headed. I had looked at a couple of diagrams of the ship ahead of time, so I knew that I wanted to get to the capstan's winch and then make a U-turn and head back around as best we could. Again, we were fighting current. You can kind of see as we're going along, some of the netting and plant life is moving quite a bit in the surge, and truthfully it would only get worse on the second dive. The Heroine was commissioned actually as a steam fishing vessel. It was originally built in Brooklyn in 1899, I believe. It was fishing off the coast of Rhode Island when it sprung a leak, and was ultimately a total loss. It sank in about 80 feet of water. We dove to 75 feet this morning. Temperature was actually pretty warm still for this late in the season, so I was pretty thankful for that, as I know Molly was for sure as well. So we're starting to just make our way up the side. As you can kind of tell, there's really not much left to the wreck in terms of intact structure. There is about 20 feet of relief in some areas, but for the most part, it's just broken up what's remaining of the structure, what's remaining of the hull. If on a clear day with good visibility, they say you can make out the boiler or the compressor, and like I had mentioned, we're trying to make our way to the capstan winch, so that we have, number one, a landmark, and number two, something intact to see before we head back. There is generally quite a bit of life on the wreck. We did see a few tautog, a few crabs. George says he saw a small 3 to 4 foot blue shark, although I was not able to see him. And then if you look in right as we're positioned now, you just saw the capstan winch. So we're about at our turning point, and I think I'm probably about to give Molly the signal to turn around. Number one, because you know, we made our objective, and number two, I'm just about at the end of my reel. So we had gotten to where we wanted to within our air margin. We're diving 30% on this dive, with the plan of our first dive being sort of a survey, getting to that capstan winch and seeing what the visibility was like and seeing sort of how the conditions were going to cooperate this morning. There's a lot of particulate suspended in the water, as you can see, and we're just kind of looking up and down the side, getting to know a bit more about the ins and outs, sort of the crevices and what's left of the wreck. If you notice, there's quite a lot of fishing gear, there's quite a lot of line and netting floating around the wreck. This is a popular fishing spot, especially earlier in the season, in the middle of the summer. Not so much so as we get into fall, so we were alone as far as guys fishing directly on the wreck goes, which was helpful. So we're starting to head back. We've made the turn, heading back toward the anchor line. Again, getting a sense of what's left of the structure. You can kind of see some edges of the steel hull down the bottom of the frame. There are a couple of more winches that are still relatively intact, although the whole ship lies on its side. So as we're heading back, we're trying to, it looks like Molly's following along my line, and we will start probably running into some of the other divers. Like I said, there were a few of us on the charter this morning, so we were certainly not alone. You can see here a bit more of some of the intact sections as it lies in the bottom. Although what's left is pretty well spread out at this point. The vessel is 100, I believe 110 or 130 feet long. Although it's when it originally sank, it was in at least two segments, and now it's in many more than that. So we'll start to cruise back. We see a couple of friends on the way. I'm going to start to undo my line as we get back toward the anchor. We're starting to get into the current now, which is a little bit easier. If you are a diver, you try to make your way out against the current and make your way back in the current, so that as you're getting down toward the middle or end of your air margin, you won't go through it and fighting your way back. You can kind of see here we bump into Ross and Matt. They're doing their exploration. I'm not sure if they ran a line or not. Luckily, we were the only group on the boat today. So we're going to start just about getting back toward the anchor line. This is quite a condensed video, although I do like to try to keep some of the more mundane segments in, rather than just cut everything out into seeing just what is sort of exciting about a dive. I like to sort of leave some of the nuts and bolts and sort of the in-between parts in the video, because I like to think that non-divers, people who either can't dive or can't bring themselves to dive, might like to see a little bit of what goes into a dive, what it's like down there, what we're seeing. And as you can see, it's not this nice big open clear situation like we might have in the Caribbean, the Bahamas, the Keys, any of the other number of places we've been diving. In New England, it's really quite a different sport. For the most part, in certain situations, and today especially, you really can only see basically to the end of your light. We are also here quite early, so it's not quite in the middle of the day where you might have a little bit better lighting. So we're sort of limited in what we can do by the equipment we can carry. The visibility is just not great. 75 feet of water in New England is a lot different from 75 feet of water in a warmer area like the Caribbean. So here we are starting to get again closer to the anchor line. If you look sort of in the bottom right, you can really see a lot of that netting, which certainly creates a hazard for divers. It's not as difficult as you might think to get yourself caught in some line and some fishing line or in that netting and have to either cut yourself free or have a buddy cut you free. And it's certainly one of the hazards that any dive class you might take is going to be sure to forewarn you about is getting entangled in something, whether it's fishing line or netting or cables left in a shipwreck or what have you, or for that matter, another diver's line. There are certainly instances where there are crossing guidelines, crossing rec reels that you maybe get entangled in, and so you have to be cognizant of everybody else on the wreck. It's not just you. I think Molly's kind of taking a step back here to get a little bit better survey, although it's tough to justify getting too far away from the wreck or the line in this much current, because you really want to have an anchor point if you can. And I believe what we're looking at here, actually it's tough to tell, but I believe this is the edge of what's left of either a yard arm that's holding up some of the netting. There is sort of what's left of a superstructure somewhere on the wreck that is supposedly one of the boilers, though I don't think we quite made it there today. That could be an intake or an exhaust as well. I'm not too familiar with the wreck or the ship, the vessel, and its structure prior to its sinking, so it's tough to speak too intelligently on the parts that we're running into. Again, as you can see, there's quite a bit of line and cable left on the wreck, so you really have to be cognizant of that. Part of what makes this a good fishing site is all those crevices, though. Fish and game like to hide out in places where they can be safe, and shipwrecks certainly provide a bounty of that. A lot of incrustation. Pretty much the entire vessel is now encrusted with local marine flora and inhabited by its local fauna. I'm thinking what we're looking at now is probably sort of the underside of the keel and what's left of sort of the bones of the ship itself. We do spend quite a bit of time sort of just surveying what we're looking at, again, because of our lack of familiarity, we wanted to take our time going out and take our time coming in. You're seeing a condensed version of the dive, although, you know, per our plan, we were probably 25 minutes out, 25 minutes in, maybe a little less. It looks like we're getting ready to get back in and untie. There you can see the breakaway line for the anchor. It looks like we're back at the anchor line. There's my strobe blinking. If it looks like we might be in a rave or a nightclub, that's why. You know, the divers, each team or buddy pair or individual diver will leave a marker on the anchor line, so that way the last person up knows who's back and who's still down. Everybody's strobe is either on or off the line. It's sort of like a marker in a coal mine. So I believe we got back to the line. This is dive number 1. We got back well within our air and time margin. So I think I left my strobe on the line for now, and what I'm signaling to Molly there is let's keep going. You know, we ran a few feet back by the anchor line in the other direction to get a sense of what was going on opposite of where we just were prior to coming back up the anchor line and ending the first dive. I don't think we made it too far. We wanted to make sure we had plenty of gas, or at least that I had plenty of gas for the second time. I'm diving my double high pressure steel 80s this morning, so I need to be a bit conservative with my gas supply so that I can make 2 dives out of it. Okay, so here we are. Actually, this is the descent on dive number 2, and as you can see, if you're looking at this particular matter, the current is really ripping now, and if you watch the bubbles coming out of my mouth, my exhaust, they're just carried right away from me immediately. There's really no lingering. You can see that it's almost like driving in a snowstorm. We're really fighting. It doesn't look like it, but we're essentially dragging ourselves hand over hand down this line just to even make it to the bottom. So much so that what I'm doing now is my long hose for my primary regulator was just blown straight off my shoulders. So looks like I sorted that out, and here we are, just pulling ourselves along, really just fighting against this current. With the full moons lately, I think that the swings in tide have just been a bit more exaggerated. So we're still making our way down for dive number 2. We're hanging on the tagline. Actually, between dives, our boat, rotated about 180 degrees, so the 2 ends of the Carolina line had actually been twisted, and the anchor line ended up wrapped around part of the wreck. So here we get down to the bottom again. We're close to what I believe, or I was told, was part of the boiler. And we actually got down into the sands, and before we realized, that's me hanging onto the anchor line there, that the line was wrapped around part of the wreck, so we had thought we had tied in or tagged down onto a different part of the wreck, when in fact we just had to follow the line a bit longer. But we did eventually find where it wrapped around. We ended up getting back to our tie-in point where the breakaway line was, and I think you'll see in a minute, there's the breakaway line there, that white line. So we'll tie in our strobe here. As it is now, we're just getting oriented again. The plan for this dive was similar to last one, heading in the same direction, but as you'll see, we started off and frankly just absolutely couldn't swim against the current. It would have been imprudent to try to go against the current. The dive would have just been too short. We would have run the risk of running out of gas. It was a current such that you really can't fight against it. So there we are. My strobe is now on the line. Molly and I were the ones to kick off the rave party, the strobe show this time. We were the first in the water for the second dive, and kind of keep an eye on the particulate matter. You can see how strong the current is if you're watching it, and there are some shifts. It's not always flowing, in the same direction. So we have to kind of be cognizant of that as we can end up getting sort of blown against the wreck or blown away from the wreck. So watching our orientation and keeping an eye on where the current is facing is always something we're trying to do. So we're working our way a little bit up and over some of the wreckage when compared to the previous dive. We had followed part of the anchor line where it had been wrapped almost into the middle of the wreckage, so that we can see, number one, where it went, number two, what was over there. Here you can see Molly getting onto my line so she can follow me without losing touch. So we'll keep working our way away from the anchor line here. If you might notice it's a little bit brighter than even the last dive, and that's because since we got out of the water, the sun has come up by a few hours. So we do have a little bit more direct overhead light. That being said, we are still in 75-ish feet of water, so we will start to lose from one end of the infrared spectrum down until the last thing you're left with is blue and then ultimately black. So that's why everything that's not being touched by one of our torches just looks green. The first thing to go is red. And that's one of the things that makes making these videos most challenging is color correcting. The GoPro, which this was shot on a GoPro Hero 9, I believe Hero 9 Black. GoPro does a pretty good job as far as straightforward, simple point-and-shoot action cameras go. It does a pretty good job. But we do try to re-white balance it a little bit just to give you a little bit better of an idea of what things actually might look like. That being said, when we're down there, we are only seeing the green you're seeing in the areas that are lit up by our torches that do look how they look on the video to us. So it's amazing what, not that much in relative terms, not that much water does to light. So in this dive, we're actually able to get a little bit more into sort of the guts of the wreck. And you can see some of these compartments we're looking in. We did, we saw some of the usual suspects for the region, quite a bit of tautog again, a few crabs out here, despite the fact they were a bit offshore. There is supposedly a resident eel who lives under one portion of the wreck, although we didn't run into him. You'll see again, if you kind of watch, there's still quite a lot of netting and fishing tackle hanging around here. Actually, one of the most prominent things we noticed or saw on the wreck was just lures and fishing weight and hooks, to the extent that you'll see in a little bit. There was a tautog who was caught on a hook which was attached to some netting, who I made a misguided attempt at trying to free. It just didn't work out quite so well. I think at this point we've actually made the turn to head back. This is probably the point at which the current picked up to the extent that we wanted to be careful with our air margins so that we can get back to the anchor line. And it's always, the wreck isn't, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. They never drain the ocean. So at the end of the day, it's always a better decision to call it early, head back, stick close to where your ascent point is, see what you can see. If you think there's going to be any risk to your safety margin, which, again, we're not far offshore, 75 feet of water. We do have, a pretty small area we're checking out. But at the end of the day, it's always the best bet to just be conservative. So the visibility too, remember we've also had 6 to 8 divers dive this, and now we're on the second dive. So some of the visibility, some of that particular matter is now suspended in the whole area, and it's tough to preserve and improve that visibility without letting it settle back down. Although that being said, with the current the way it is, it was unlikely to settle down in the time we were going to be out there. So you make do with what you can. You again can see the flow changing and speeding up and stopping. Some of that is partly due to Molly moving the camera the way she is, but we are definitely fighting a current at this point, and it only gets stronger once we're back up on the anchor line again. So we're back at the nightclub. We're back. I think we're gonna probably retrieve my strobe, and at this point we're gonna head in the other direction away from the anchor line, because we decided that we had a few minutes left within our air reserves, our air margin, to head away from the anchor line in the opposite direction and see if we can see anything. There's that tautog who's caught on that hook, and I think you'll see me coming from the right and try to get near him enough to get him off the hook, but unfortunately he ended up just taking off kind of in a panic and dragging a few weights with him. I think you'll see him flutter by on the top of your screen. Yeah, he ended up dragging a few of the lead weights with him, which I'm not sure how that's going to play out for him, but I don't know that it'll end well. So here we are. We're going to make our ascent back up to the boat. I appreciate you tuning in for this latest dive. Again, this is a wreck dive of the Heroine off the coast of Rhode Island, and we'll see you all again in the next one. Take care.